site by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution Radio. I am your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, and my lovely co-host, Leah Shaper, is back from Chaco Canyon.
Hello. We are both back from Chaco Canyon.
Welcome to the show, folks. If you watched last week's episode, we did a deep dive, well, a halfway deep dive into the Yuga cycle and the ins and outs of this Hindu cosmology, which is basically a cosmic tempo based on sacred geometry or something happening in our solar system or our galaxy, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And the Yuga cycle was, it seems to be determined by simply objectively looking at what's going on with civilization and then recognizing a pattern of increase and decrease of things.
Yes. Increase and decrease of abilities and understanding of how the cosmos works.
So we know that this exists. A lot of people have argued about the duration, but the Vedic idea was a 24,000-year cycle, which has since been amended due to some mathematical work of Milankovitch, where they determined the exact periodicity of the precession of the equinoxes based on our current slipping, so to speak. And it is a slipping. And that's what I want to get to in here, because it is the misunderstanding of Earth slipping through the galaxy that they say is because we're wobbling, when in fact, the ancients, the Greeks, the Mithrists, the Far East, the Hindus, even the Dogon tribe knew about the star Sirius and the fact that on the summer solstice, this star would rise on the horizon at sunrise every time at the same moment, which was the middle of the summer or whatever that moment was that they all recognized because it was very observational. What I mean by very observational is right now, in the current time, Sirius is the brightest star in the night sky. But back then, if in fact we are in a binary system, Sirius would have been much more serious.
Well, but then there's the additional problem too, right? When you look at precession of the equinoxes and see that we're, retrograding through the zodiac very slowly, right? The rate of precession does change a little bit, but we're going through that very slowly. And at the same time, Sirius does not move within that precession. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't get that same backwards retrograde with Sirius.
Yeah, and to an astronomer, it's even more mind-blowing, because if you look at the sun and Sirius, the entire background moves and the sun and Sirius do not.
Right.
So
what's going on there?
Yeah.
And if there is any movement, it's very, very tiny, like imperceptible so very slow over a very long period of time.
So what we're looking at is probably not the correct geometry of what's going on, but is probably exactly what's going on in some fashion.
I mean, this is completely hypothetical at the moment, right? Like, we haven't actually determined that we are in this kind of rotational movement with Sirius. For our audio-only listeners, we're looking at two elliptical orbits, one of the sun and one of another star, potentially Sirius, where those elliptical orbits overlap each other. And so where they overlap, you get this sort of other third orbit between the sun and Sirius as they get close to each other.
Right. And the mountain of evidence is piling up against Milankovitch cycles and the solar lunar cycle that they claim causes the precession of our planet or the wobbling. Mm-hmm. Because as we gain more and more knowledge, and now we have AI, it appears to be not the case that the moon and the sun are not capable of wobbling our planet. Mm-hmm. But another star system like Sirius would be. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, Let's just dive into the basic science. The problem with our thinking currently as the sun our current thinking is the sun is stationary at the center of our solar system, and we are unique. We're just a solar system in unto ourselves. The problem is recent observations have shown that there are very few, if none, of what is called a solitary solar system. All suns are in an interaction with at least a binary or a trinary or more suns.
I thought there were some that were singular, but just not that many of them. Like, it's not necessarily the norm.
It's
like the norm seems to more likely to be binary star systems.
The ones that are still singular is because we cannot see the other sun.
Well,
period.
I considered that as well, right? Maybe we just don't know what their binary is.
So the better our technology gets, what happens is the ratio of these binaries and trinaries rapidly rises, and the solitary solar systems are going towards zero. At some point, what we're going to find is that there are no such thing as anything solitary in our universe, that everything is connected through Birkeland currents.
Right.
So
I just want to throw in there too, before you go ahead. I mean, the other, I think, and I sort of said this already, but the other really important thing about this is, again, that the rate of precession is not constant. And that's kind of important to consider. Like, why would that be? If precession was only caused by our gravitational relationships with the moon and the sun, then why wouldn't precession be constant? This model with a binary system explains why the precession wouldn't be constant, which is that as we approach our binary star, that our movement actually speeds up, increasing the rate of precession. And then the further away that we are from that binary, it slows down, which would potentially seem to be where we are at right now, very far away from our binary.
Right. And the precession is actually changing in duration. And there is a very good explanation for that. The sun Sirius is much larger than our sun, and Sirius would be controlling this motion because of its mass. The fact that Sirius is 71% larger and also contains at least one other companion star. Many people think that there are three, and we'll get to the myths that allude to that. But Sirius has the system is twice the mass of our solar system, so it is going to be controlling this dynamic here, because it's the bigger guy that would control this binary interaction that we're looking at here in the graphic.
Yeah.
And so if the mass of Sirius is changing, because what some scientists believe is Sirius B is now rapidly moving towards Sirius A, and it'll soon be incorporated. In fact, it has some ridiculous, like 93,000 times the mass of our sun. So it's a very dense, small object, this Sirius B. And it would be this mass that's controlling the precession of the equinoxes.
Yeah.
And
the other thing about this.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
We're in the back of this. So if you're looking at the model on the video, we are literally in the Kali Yuga, which is the slowest part and the furthest away from our binary companion. And we're now just moving towards it just now.
Yeah.
And the idea is that humans are light beings, and that most of the plant life on Earth are also light beings, and we eat the plant life and so on and so forth. Without light, there can be no life in this system that we're living in. And it is, in fact, Sirius is brighter than our sun. It is, in fact, 25 times brighter and produces 26 times the energy of our sun. So Sirius, if we are in this binary, is the main driver of everything: climate and consciousness, as well as abundance. And the closer we get to Sirius, the more light is on Earth, and the more humanity becomes enlightened. It's that simple. And
even put more generally than that, you could just look at it as energy, right? And with that, you have to kind of accept the idea that physical energy is not different than spiritual energy, right? So the idea is that as we approach Sirius and we receive more energy from Sirius, it's not just the energy in the physical sense as we understand it, but also in the spiritual sense, and then that is what leads to the further enlightenment.
And what's unique in this mock-up that we're looking at here is that the Earth, or our sun and Sirius, stay pretty constantly together for a very long period of time during that inner wobble, which is the very long golden age of enlightenment. So for thousands of years, we are very close to our binary companion.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and the other thing too that I wanted to mention is that the idea that the sun is completely stationary in our system is well, within our system, that's fine. Like, relatively speaking, within our system, the sun is essentially stationary. But the idea that it's stationary throughout the universe is kind of silly, right? Especially because we talk about things like the universe expanding. We always talk about the universe as if it's always in motion. So why would our sun always be sitting in the same place?
It's
Like, it's
not. It's
again
moving.
like we're completely unique. But that
So
doesn't make sense. Of course we're moving.
That ancient idea of the plane of the ecliptic and everything stationary revolving around the sun is not correct. We are, in fact, the whole system is moving at tens of thousands of miles an hour forward.
Right.
So nothing
So
is
why are we acting like our sun is stationary and that we need this silly lunar solar explanation to explain precession of the equinoxes? It's pretty stupid.
And so the whole idea of this binary system is that here is our solar system moving down the Birkeland current, that Sirius is also involved in here and spinning around us at the same time. And the science has been worked out. We know about Birkeland currents. We've observed them in deep space now. We know about the rotational forces, and they're not necessary. The vortical, they don't have to be like circular as far as its rotation. So we can get this dynamic inside of the spinning of a Birkeland current to give us this exact model that we're looking at, where the Birkeland current is bigger than the entire field here where the sun and Sirius are interacting. They're actually inside the Birkeland current doing this dance.
Yeah.
Spinning forward at a very high velocity.
Yeah.
Now, this seems like complete crazy science because it goes against almost all the current cosmology that exists. But based on ancient knowledge and what we now know about the problems with cosmology, which are innumerable, to say the least, we may be on the precipice of actually, because we're moving up here, right? We're now in the Dwarpa and we're ascending. I'm pretty sure at some point soon, we're going to have the revelation that we are in a binary with Sirius. And the unique thing is that even tribes like the Dogon are aware of Sirius. So this is interesting. And we would still be using Sirius to mark our year if it weren't for the Gregorian calendar.
Right.
Did you look into any of that?
No, I'm just sort of vaguely aware of that concept.
So prior to the Gregorian calendar, where we now have to add a leap day every leap year, every 4 years, we got to add a day. If we were using Sirius to start the year, we would never have to add a second.
Yeah.
And the Mithrists used Sirius to start the year. The people that studied Plato were using Sirius back in the time of the Greeks to begin the year.
Yeah.
And many others around the world, in the Far East, in Mesopotamia, the Hindu traditions, the Mayans, the Mayan calendar, the Aztec calendar, in ancient China, all used Sirius. And then we switched it for a very important reason. And I believe it is so that we would lose this knowledge.
I was just about to say, it's that it's the process of forgetting, right? So can you pull up the Yuga cycle image there? So if we're in the descending half of the Yuga cycle, it's like, and you look back on all the history, it's like we just keep forgetting stuff all the way down through the descent of this cycle. And like now we're trying to remember. So potentially, let's say at the top of the Satya Yuga, the Golden Age, 12,000 years ago, a bit more than that, maybe the Dogon and their ancestors, maybe they knew that we were in this binary with Sirius because, as you suggested last week, perhaps they could actually see it much better. Like perhaps at this time, Sirius is acting like a second sun for Earth.
It would have to be.
We knew.
It would have to be. No, even if in our binary, when we get to that central point, that we were still 2 or 3 light years away.
Yeah.
Sirius is pretty serious, emitting 26 times the energy of the sun. So at that distance, it might even be brighter than the sun. And it might also explain the dog days of summer. The dog star is Sirius. and Sirius rises during the middle of summer. And if 8,000 years ago, when Sirius was close, if it was already 85 degrees in the afternoon and Sirius rises, it's going to go up to 105. It is going to be hell on earth. And the dog days of summer can only be explained by the dog star.
So I was thinking about this yesterday, and here's my question. So, and maybe this really depends on the actual distance that we are from Sirius, but I considered the fact that in a period of time where we're much closer to Sirius, is this going to affect our climate in a major way? And is that reflected in our geological record? And the problem that I'm having with that at the moment is that if you look at the 100,000 year climate cycle, right now we're at the peak of the cycle, right? Where we're in an interglacial warming, essentially.
Yep.
So, but we are probably also the furthest from Sirius that we could be. So that doesn't line up. So that's a question in all of this that I think maybe needs to be resolved. And maybe it's an issue of even when we're close to Sirius, we're just not close enough for it to dramatically affect our climate. What do you think?
I think that the climate systems are looked at too simply. We can't even predict the weather out a few days. And that the fact that us being the furthest away from Sirius and the interglacial or the interstadial happening means that we do not understand the dynamics of our solar system. So if in fact what we will see here, and you can even see it, if Sirius in the precession of the equinoxes is happening every 26,000 years or so, there are spikes that correspond to the furthest away point being the warmest, and the closest then would be the coldest. And so
why would that be?
Because how does an ice age start? That's the question you need to ask. And they begin when all of the ice on Earth is melted, which is not now. When we have ice on Earth, it's warm. When all of the ice is gone, it shuts down the thermohaline circulation, where all the heat on Earth is in the ocean, and it stops being distributed.
Right.
And then the Earth freezes very rapidly. So
so it's almost
cause and effect. Now look at the freezing. It freezes very rapidly straight down and then rapidly warms after. Yeah. So it's almost an instantaneous effect. Now Sirius is still around and it's warm, but it's after the glacial period that it warms back up because all the circulation currents have to start up again, etc.
Well, I was actually going to say the opposite, that it's more like the delayed effect, right? Like it's just it's extremely delayed effect of that. It's not happening at the same time that let's say we're close to Sirius. And if the precession really is about, 24, let's say 25,000 years, well, we can fit 4 close approaches to Sirius within 100,000 year time frame where we see these major spikes. So that also started making me wonder, like, okay, well, maybe we also have relationships to other stars like this. Maybe when we have a really strong peak, maybe that's a reflection of also having a physical relationship with other stars in the system. Maybe it's not just binary, maybe it's trinary, something like that.
Yeah, and many of the ancient cultures discussed the 3 wise men, the 3 kings. Yeah. And that would be the 3 stars of Sirius.
Yeah.
We only know of 2 currently, and the Dogon remembered 2. But it is most scholars like us that believe in this, that at some point in the near future, we are going to locate Sirius C. And that will then make the myth science, which is completely mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So here, let me read to you before we get into the second half and maybe dissect this a little more. Our sun and Sirius are 8.7 light years away currently. And they are binary stars. Our sun is in an orbit with Sirius, and I would say it's about 25,900 years currently. Just as the ancients told us, just as the ancients encoded it into their buildings worldwide. And it's the elliptical orbit with our binary star that affects life on Earth, with the distance of the orbit being the age of time. More light closer to the sun is to Sirius, less light the further away we are, which in the current age, we are just coming out from the furthest point away. And exiting the Kali Yuga here. We're getting closer to Sirius, and based on the models, it rapidly increases towards us.
Yeah.
There have been calculations done by Walter Crittenden over a decade ago and other groups. We can do calculations because we are moving relative to Sirius. And the calculations say that if we're in a binary, it's like 70,000 years or something based on the current rate we're closing in on it.
Yeah.
But they do not account for the model we just showed, a rapid acceleration due to the mass.
Yeah.
And if it was a static cycle that they calculated mathematically at 70,000, could easily be 26,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And because we're at the slowest point, they're calculating at this rate, what would it take?
Right. I mean, this is the problem with this concept is that we're like not able to step outside of the time frame in order to accurately assess what our relationship is with Sirius, just because we're never around that long, right? We need like an ongoing calculation over like 20,000 years.
Yeah, from a distant satellite that is away from both of the stars.
Yes, which would be quite far away.
But guess what? This has already been done about 6,000 years ago during the descending Yuga. We've already done this. We already knew the calculations of Sirius. So even 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, the Dogon would have been very well aware of our binary, the fact that they could also visibly see the binary of Sirius B is also evidence. But there are other cultures that talk about the Sirius system having 3 suns.
Yeah.
In the ancient times, A, B, and C. And this is who the 3 wise men are in Christian folklore. This is who the 3 companions of the Lord of the Rings are in the fictional book series. And this is the 3 most impactful ideas in the Roman Catholic Church: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And the Holy Ghost is Sirius C, which the ancients said is almost impossible to know it's there.
Right.
Which is why we haven't found it yet.
Right.
This is so, tingles are going up my spine here.
Yeah. You know, it's like that thing where, I mean, I think we really need to listen to what we call the myths, the old wives' tales, the legends, because again and again, we see that they mean something. I mean, we've talked about this in another capacity, even the dumbest little phrases, right? Like the day that I discovered what egg on your face really means and where it comes from, right? I was looking for a chicken who was eating eggs, and the way I found her was I found a chicken with yolk on her face, and I went, oh, egg on your face. It actually means something. There's a reason why we have certain phrases and myths and stories.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, in the Kabbalah or in the ancient Hebrew texts, they talk about the 50-year atonement year of Yovel. And what many scholars have said is that this is referring to the alignment of Sirius A, B, and C with our sun, which occurs every 50 years. And it sends a pulse of God energy our way. So it's like every 50 years, there's an enlightenment cycle to bring us up. So the Yuga is actually occurring in pulses, the shifts. It's not gradual. It's these alignments that shoot the new knowledge to us, and we reach the next level. And in this article,
in the same way that we have these catastrophes that cause us to forget stuff, right? Like that's another pulse that happens.
Yeah, that's a physical forgetter, and this is a spiritual rememberer.
Yeah.
But according to this Reddit post, that 50-year cycle occurred in October of this year.
Huh.
I don't know how they calculated that.
Huh.
But all the links to everything we talk about today will be below because it's very important. And that brings us to the Binary Research Institute, which really brought this to the mainstream. I'm going to reach out to Walter and get him on the show.
Great.
I've spoken to him in the past. He's pretty easy to get to. So that's good news.
Yeah.
Because he's fascinated by the fact that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of scientists now awakening to these ideas. And they're contacting him. So the scholar Walter Crittenden offered a radical theory that the reason for the apparent wobble on Earth, our precession of the equinoxes, is in fact because our sun is part of a binary system. He didn't go out on the limb and say Sirius back then. He just, at that point, we knew almost all stars were binary or multiple systems. And at that point, we were just getting the understanding that everything's moving through the Milky Way rapidly. What if we're in a binary with a star that's right around us? You know, within 10 light years, we would, in our little lifetime, we would have no way of knowing.
Right, exactly.
There's so little motion.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So that really leads us into the second half. Stay tuned with the Sphinx, which used to be Anubis. Serious.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
The Secret Kindergarten is here for the young children of the world. The best program on the radio for kids, dealing with the most important topics in the whole universe. Fairy tales, music and movement, numbers, plants, animals, fun, colors, insects. Take care and cast your ears out to catch a story from the world of other young things. Reach out, up, under, and over. Sing a song. Talk about feelings. Just remember the magic word. The magic word is no. Step on into the Secret Kindergarten. Saturdays, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Rouge Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Rouge Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back with the second half of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio, #1 listener-supported internet radio. So become a Patreon and support free speech because it is rapidly disappearing. Now, we're in an interesting conversation. Are we in a binary with Sirius? And is that the driving force of the Yuga cycles and human enlightenment? Now, there is episodes and episodes of information we could talk about in the second half about this. It explains why Göbekli Tepe would be buried at the time of the Golden Age, because they knew we'd be idiots and there would be catastrophes before we got smart enough to uncover it and understand it. Mm-hmm. It makes sense why at the Golden Age, if that's the time of the megalithic builders, they're building gigantic things encoded with it, the precession of the equinoxes, the distance of the sun, all these crazy stats to say, look, we knew it all and you're dumb now. And you need to build a big enough structure to last for half a Yuga cycle, at least 12,000 years. So that's what they knew. This has got to last 12,000 years at least.
Yes. So speaking of Göbekli Tepe, I was thinking last night about the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe. Do you have that image that I sent you?
And I very well may have that.
It struck me that so if you look at enclosure D, so this is where the vulture stone is, and I'm thinking about the two central pillars, and it suddenly strikes me that this very much looks like what we are hypothesizing is our binary system. We've got the two central pillars, and then around it, we have 12 other stones, as if those are our zodiac positions. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Huh?
So C would be like a different part of the Yuga rotated.
Well, right. Well, maybe I'm thinking about this a couple of different ways, right? So going back to D, right? Like, let's say the vulture stone really does identify, like the Sweatman and Citricus talk about the vulture on the vulture stone being a part of Sagittarius, right? So maybe the other stones are the other zodiacs. Maybe the sighting stone is like a way of saying, here's where we are right now. And then maybe the other enclosures, like, okay, if this is roughly 12,000 years ago, then that within our hypothesis, that would suggest that we were close to Sirius at the time. If there are other bodies involved or other systems that are nearby, perhaps we could also detect those, and maybe those are the other enclosures, right? So the idea being that enclosure B, C, and A would be other binary systems where, so let's say, look at enclosure C, we've got 11 stones around the binary, and then around that, another layer of stones. So perhaps those are other constellations in that system, something like that. Or I'd also consider that maybe this is our precession of the equinox in another phase, like in a different 24,000 year cycle. So it's as if Göbekli Tepe is presenting an entire cosmological calendar / map, and maybe also telling us about certain things that have happened in the general neighborhood of our cosmos in the past.
Yeah, and because we're so stupid, we're trying to determine if anyone lived there.
Right. Oh, also, right. The other thing that was interesting to me too is I was reading a little bit about enclosure A yesterday, which only has it has the two central pillars again, and then it's, so far as we know, there's 3 other pillars around it. But it was noted that I think it's pillar 2 was actually moved. So it was in a different position at one time. And then when it was moved, it was also flipped around so that the front became the back and the back became the front. And I thought, like, well, that's interesting. Like, could it be that that's a binary system where we detected a a change in position of the binary the binary system.
Well, from the
and then
angle relative to north, it's also pointing at the lunar standstill, which is the same orientations of the diagonals of many of the square structures that we just came from Chaco, which do not align with north or south or east or west. And people are like, what? And then they look through diagonal to diagonal, and it lined up perfectly with the 18.6-year lunar standstill.
Yeah.
As if the moon has a major part. I mean, this is a huge cycle, 18.6 years. You would literally be witnessing the slipping of the zodiac every 18.6 years. You could see it move at that scale.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and then the other thing that's really interesting too about this diagram is like that red line that goes down the center is always like right in between the two central pillars, and that line is the line of symmetry of the enclosure.
Ah, interesting.
So it kind of like, if you look at enclosure D, it kind of suggests that like that hold sighting stone, I was thinking that could potentially really line up with the middle of the Satya Yuga, right? So right in between when we ascend and then descend, right in the middle of that, which would line up with the time frame that we've identified for Gobekli Tepe. And there's a sighting stone right there, right on that line.
Yeah. Because the guys are saying this lines up with 12,800, 12,900 years ago. That is literally how long ago that the very top of the Golden Age would have been, right around 13,000 years ago.
Right. And then the vulture stone, if that truly does depict an event that occurred around the time of the Younger Dryas, would also, if we're looking at this as sort of a clock, would almost, it's like in the very right position, right? It's right before the time frame in which this was built.
Which would lead you to believe that humanity knew about this long before these structures were being built.
Yeah.
It's far too complex to be like, this is the learning ground or something, or a proving ground. With the bas relief, the specificity of the carvings, the alignments, the size and weight of these pillars in a time where the earth was just destroyed. These are actually only dated to the latest date around 1105 at Gobekli Tepe. Some of the other Anatolian sites are earlier. So these people would have been here for the entire Younger Dryas catastrophe, the mass extinction, and 1,000 years of cold, and then they build this.
So it's almost as if, okay, so like we're in the Golden Age, we're in the Satya Yuga, and maybe because of natural catastrophes, people kind of realize that we're going to lose the knowledge that we have about how the cosmos works. And so then you build this amazing thing to preserve that knowledge.
Yeah, so at no other point,
and it is kind of like a teaching ground,
that
right?
makes sense. No other point during the Golden Age, because we're all gods and we're floating around on our things. Everyone knows everything. It is until everything's destroyed that you're like, wait a minute. Yeah. What if there's a time when everyone doesn't know everything? We got to build these things.
Right. So now you map out the whole calendar, the whole calendar and map of the universe to show what's really going on here. And this maybe becomes like a teaching ground for the people who are there, because now you can like literally walk people through these enclosures and tell all of the stories about what happened cosmologically in the past, how the structure is, and the spatial relationships are. And how they're going to interact with each other. And so you just like lay it all out there. And then eventually you bury it, right? Because you realize the things are going to get so bad that you need to, in order to preserve this, you need to actually put it underground. And nobody's going to understand it in 12,000 years anyway, right? Here we are like scratching our heads and struggling to understand what this thing means.
Yeah, and maybe it's these flexure points where we get the mass impactors coming in here as we swing around the other star system. Maybe they're dragging stuff.
Well, but of course they are, right? Because we have planets
through the field of that debris.
Yeah,
twice.
And
boom.
And that makes sense because we've got planets and we've got comets and asteroids, all these things that are in our system. There's no reason to think that Sirius wouldn't have the same thing. And so obviously the chances for collisions at that point is going to be much greater.
Right. And then you could completely lose your mind and say, well, maybe Sirius C is a planet and it's Nibiru and it comes by every 24,000 years instead of 2,400.
Right.
And then
Well,
the
and
Anunnaki can come over to our planet with their little taxi cabs.
right. Right. Which is interesting in and of itself, right? Because you do have some scientists right now who are looking for an extra planet to explain the motion of our solar system, but what they're looking for is a planet that's absolutely huge because the mass needs to be quite large. I mean,
Yeah,
to
and
me, it makes more sense that it's probably a sun. but-
Sirius. They refuse to accept it's
Right.
Sirius,
Right. Right.
which is 71% larger than our sun, and is the mass that they're looking for. It's just so far away that they're not considering it.
Well, and which is silly, right? Because as we discussed earlier, that relative to us, when we're looking at Sirius, it's still is stable. It's not moving with our precession.
It's not moving relative to the stars, which are moving, which means it's moving with us.
It's moving with us, and we are all inside what we are looking at for the precession, the zodiac, right? Which is essentially, if I'm correct, is illustrated in those Göbekli enclosures.
Right, and which is illustrated here in a plasma experiment, which is a Birkeland current. So one of these blue lines is Sirius, the other blue line is our solar system, and we're spinning around inside of the Birkeland current moving forward,
Yeah.
which the Chinese
Wow.
legend of Nuwa and Fuxi show in this mural.
Very interesting.
So
It also looks like the caduceus, doesn't it?
right, it's the caduceus, it is the kundalini, it is the life force, it is
Yeah.
plasma scaled at every level.
It's
It is the
DNA.
plasma universe, it's the DNA, it is the vortices of a river simply flowing. It's what happens in the center of a creek. It's what happens everywhere. So this science, the holy science,
Mhm.
is literally will bring together every part of all the sciences in a greater understanding of humanity, of cosmic catastrophe, and maybe if we can get a little further, our destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we are destined to relearn this knowledge again and again and again, like the process of reincarnation of
I
souls.
was about to say that.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, you know that I'm a huge proponent of the idea that we reincarnate for a reason, right? That we incarnate because our souls have determined that there's certain things that we need to learn. And so we keep coming back again and again. But in order to do that, in order to learn whatever those lessons are, the only way to do that is to forget first. You know, you're not going to learn those lessons if you remember everything prior. So this is very similar in my mind, that we come to some understanding and realization, and then as we descend in the Yuga cycle, we forget it all again. I mean, it's amazing because it's like everything is like cycles inside cycles.
But the Greeks knew this knowledge at the very bottom of the Kali Yuga. That's when they were using Sirius to mark the year and the great year. They were literally at the bottom of the bottom, yet they knew about this.
Well, and maybe that's a function of, I mean, like the Greeks readily admit that most of their knowledge came from the Egyptians, right? And then
and the Hindus in the case of the great year, they stole it. They didn't have any knowledge.
Right. So it's almost as if, like, you know, we've all forgotten, continuously forgotten, gradually forgotten, but that there's like a string of information that remains that we keep passing on from civilization to civilization. And like, really all we have left of that right now is like the zodiac, right? Like you and I have talked about, like, how is it that it seems like the figures that we recognize in the sky as the zodiac don't seem to change that much from civilization to civilization over time? And it's like, that's like the one string of information that remains. It's interesting.
You can go all the way into the Paleolithic caves of Lascaux 40,000 years ago, and they're drawing these zodiacal pictures.
They're drawing Taurus the bull, right, in relation to the Pleiades.
Absolutely insane.
It's really interesting.
Why would that be the only painting on Earth?
Right. Well, there are probably more that we just haven't found.
Right. But I'm saying that is repeated in all the caves. It's that significant. They knew it would be saved there. It was to show that they knew.
Yeah. Well, and of course, like for any of this kind of knowledge, it is the most important knowledge you could ever possibly have. right? Like it demonstrates some understanding of the cosmos. So you're going to write it, quote unquote, write it down somehow. You're going to paint it in a cave. You're going to build a monument like Göbekli Tepe or whatever it is. You're going to be like, this is the most important thing we could, the Mayan calendar, right? Like, how does that fit into all of this? I have never really studied the Mayan calendar, but like, there's probably some parallels there too, right? So you're gonna, that's the one thing you're going to write down.
Well, the Mayan calendar basically is the great year. It's it's Randall Carlson's cosmic catastrophe clock. It's the precession of the equinoxes. It's so insane that this isn't the focus of science today. This would literally uncover everything we need to know, and people are studying about fake greenhouse gases and farts and just such garbage. We are so stupid. I wonder if these higher societies, after the catastrophe, when they start recording all this and panic, they knew, they had a revelation. They were like, oh my God, the people in 12,000 years, if they don't have this, they're going to be so stupid. They're going to look up and be like, what's a star? I mean, they knew it, and they were like, we've got to write this down.
Well, right. And like, why would civilization after civilization basically come to the same conclusion again and again and again? And I mean about the Yuga cycle, right? The Mayans, the Hindus, well, the Vedic people, I should say, because that's more of an ancient Hinduism. I mean, why do we keep coming to the same conclusion and then we're like ignoring it as if it doesn't mean anything? And it's because our heads are so still largely in the material and the physical. Like our understanding of energy in the universe is so limited right now. Like we don't even understand how the physical energy that we look at in science all the time is related to spiritual energy, but it would seem that they're actually the same thing. We just don't understand the relationship because we're still way too far down in the cycle.
Yeah, cosmologists deny plasma in our universe. That's how stupid we are. They claim that there's an imaginary thing called dark energy and dark matter, which account for 95% of everything. That's how stupid we are. And they go along with it. That makes sense. It makes sense that 95% of everything is some stuff that we can't ever see.
Well,
so stupid.
The stupidest part about it is that all of those kinds of explanations, let's say like dark matter, dark energy, that kind of stuff, those explanations are actually like ridiculously complicated. But we have much simpler explanations right at hand that are much more elegant.
Elegant, and you're looking at him.
Yeah.
So we showed all these interesting GIFs. I want to get to this whole concept here of Anubis. And so there have been arguments about everything on and on, that it was a recarved head. What's clearly known is that this head is too small for the body, and it had to have been recarved into this shape because it would make no sense to have this tiny head on the body. Mm-hmm. Everyone agrees that the head was larger and recarved by a pharaoh. But what was the head? Right. Many people claim that it was the head of a lion because it lines up with Leo on the sunrise 11,500 years ago when they assume it was made.
Let me interject for 1 second. Despite the fact that the head is too small, I think there's other reasons to consider that it could have been Leo, which is if you look at the face compared to the back of the head, like to me, it looks like the face was carved and the back of the head was left the way it is. Like the face has these really sharp lines, and like that horizontal line kind of in the middle of the back of the head is actually like quite jagged, as if it's really eroded. And you could argue that that could be a lion's mane, but it is a good point that the head is so small.
And there's a couple other things going on the Giza Plateau here in Egypt. There is no plethora of information worldwide referring to Leo at all in any ancient cultures. If you've been listening from the beginning, all ancient cultures determined the year based on Sirius rising on the horizon, which Anubis is Sirius, the dog star, and the Sphinx is pointing to the place on the horizon where Sirius rises on the solstice. Not only that, the tiny shafts in the Cheops in the Great Pyramid that go diagonally up and out, that they have no idea what they are for, when you stick a line in them, they would align with Sirius in the sky.
Right.
Which gives you a bigger, so we've got the Sirius connection everywhere. Now we have a deep Sirius connection in Egypt. Why would we invoke Leo? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, and the other problem with that is
Literally
like,
everyone is using Sirius at this time. Mesopotamia, everybody, the Far East, everyone. And so why wouldn't they be using it in Egypt?
well,
They
so here's
have
the other.
the Anubis. They worship the dog star. It is extremely important.
And here's the other problem is, okay, if the Sphinx was a lion and it's looking at Leo, well, potentially it wouldn't be looking at Leo anymore because of precession of the equinoxes.
Oh yeah, it's far away.
Also, if the Egyptians were using the autumnal equinox to determine these points, to say we're in the, if we wanted to say we were in the age of Leo at this time at best, so this is assuming that the old kingdom of Egypt is actually much older than what the official archaeological narrative is, right? So let's say roughly.
Well, this is what they did. They took the assumption and they used an archaeoastronomical clock and they just ran it back and found when Leo rised in front of the Sphinx, and it was 11,000 or 500 years ago.
Right, but supposedly, most civilizations around 12,000 years ago were using the autumnal equinox to say what age we are in, not the vernal one. So if this were pointing to Leo to indicate age of Leo, they would actually have to have been using the vernal equinox, which doesn't really seem to fit in with the knowledge that we have about other ancient civilizations. So that's another issue. And then some people also say that the constellation Leo fits inside the body of the Sphinx, but that's pretty subjective. And look at the shape of the thing.
Think about how these ancient cultures lived. The Mayans, the Egyptians, the cycle of the year would have been the most important thing ever. They celebrate the solstice, the equinox. They would celebrate the rising of the dog star. It all has to do with the way that humanity was living at this time. The year and the month, the lunar cycle and the year were the only important cycles. Everyone knew about them. And so I think that when you're trying to decipher what was going on in any of these sites, there's going to be probably reference to the year based on Sirius, not the Gregorian calendar.
Well, and the other reason,
the equinoxes and or the lunar standstills, which they find all over in the Chacoan culture.
Yeah. Well, and if you're going to build something like this to indicate your knowledge of the cosmos, the only thing you can pick is Sirius, because it's the one thing that isn't going to be moving with the precession. Right, you can't build a structure that permanently lines up with some other star. You can only do it with Sirius. So why wouldn't you pick that?
Yeah,
to say this is it's not the central point of our universe, but it's the point around which everything hinges. It's our stable orientation.
Yeah. So it appears as if we've got a long way to go to understand what's happening cosmologically, energetically, and spiritually on Earth.
Yes.
People invoke aliens and archons to describe why there are evil people and things. I think it's just that we're at the bottom of the cycle here. We're furthest away from Sirius, and it's when the most evil things can happen in our system here.
Well,
as we probably head towards the golden age, less evil things happen.
But also, if you're going to, let's say, reincarnate and in order to learn something, you can't really learn anything in the absence of bad things happening. It's the same, and I've said this to you many, many times, there's a reason why there's contrast in our universe, why there's black and white and ones and zeros. Because without that, we don't really have the ability to learn anything living in space-time this way. And it's the same thing with the Yuga, right? It's we have to descend in order to forget, and we have to experience bad things in order to understand what the good things are. I don't see how you could have any understanding of anything without that.
Right. And based on this cycle, we've incarnated at the bottom, and it's our purpose to investigate, to understand, and to teach others what may be happening, because this is the only way we can rise up in the Yuga, in the ascending phase. So we're all blessed. Even though we were born in a very crappy time where the rest of our lives are going to probably be very bad, it's for a purpose.
Yeah. Yep.
And that
Find
is
us tonight, 8 o'clock on Magnetic Reversal News, Mountain Time, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific.
Thanks for watching.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.